Have you ever had a moment where you really needed someone and they weren't there? I think on the lighthearted end of this, I consider like when you watch award shows and somebody wins and their name is called and they don't come to the stage and they were like in the bathroom. So like they're all dolled up and they're beautiful and the most like costly bathroom break ever of their lives has taken place. Like they're needed on the stage, but instead they're in the bathroom. I think about that on the comical end. And then you have like the more serious end of something where it's like, you're a child that needs a parent and that parent isn't there for them in that way and how that can shape them and impact the rest of their life's journey. It's a lot different than, missing your moment on an award stage. And I think about like when we have needs that exist, maybe it's not a person that we need, but there is a need that needs to be fulfilled. Today, earlier, before I started filming this, I burned myself very badly. Now I might be being dramatic, but it hurts and it like blistered immediately. And it's like a whole thing on my arm, right? This is significant. And I have a friend that's on the other side of this camera right now, and she's never here when I'm filming these. But she's here today and she showed up with supplies that I desperately needed for this burn on my arm. And so there are moments where I didn't even know that she was what I needed, but what she brought was what I needed to the moment. Otherwise, I'd be like crying right now trying to get this because every time I move my arm, I feel the burn. But there are things that we need and there's moments in our life that we have needs. And when those go unfulfilled, depending on kind of what the scope of that need is, it can mess with the entire trajectory of what God has called us to do in our lives. I've recently been reading in First Chronicles and Second Samuel kind of simultaneously because the books will go together sometimes. So I've been reading in this and the other day I got really immediately discouraged because in First Chronicles, there's a lot of chronicling going on. There's a lot of lists of names that I cannot pronounce, and it's all really important. And I know that it's all really important. And yet also it's hard to read. This from the girl that literally just stood in front of our whole church teaching a Wednesday night Bible study saying, the Bible is not boring. We're just lazy when we read it. And I believe that. Those genealogies and all of the chronicles that are chronicled in First and Second Chronicles, all of those things matter and they're significant. But I just kind of wanted to read like the narrative part of Second Samuel, and I opened the Bible and it was another list of names I can't pronounce. And so I was immediately kind of like, ugh. And I prayed. I was like, Lord, which we should always do as we read scripture, by the way. It's like, God, there's a purpose for all of this. This is needed in the lineage of scripture. This is important, but I don't feel it. Would you help me to understand the importance of this? That was on a Sunday morning. And then I get up and I go to church that day, and worship was like killer. It was so good, not just because the music went well, but it was good because the people were like really hungry for God's presence. And myself included, there was no difference in what our congregation was experiencing and what those of us on stage were experiencing. There was just this united hunger and thirst for him in that moment. So worship was phenomenal. And then it came time for the word. And it was different. It wasn't a sermon that came up as we're accustomed to in church, but instead our pastor had a panel of people, and they spoke life to my soul in what they were speaking. And what they were talking about was this idea of taking the mission outside of the church. And none of these people were like global missionaries or anything like that. We had a teacher on the panel. We have an electrical engineer on the panel, and we have 2 former Marines on the panel. And in each of these scenarios, they were all discussing what it has looked like to be the church in their various careers, their various positions in the world. So it was incredibly practical, but it was also like, oh my gosh, I get it now. Those lists of names in Chronicles all of the lists that I cannot pronounce. Sometimes it's genealogy. Sometimes it's this person came from this tribe and this matters because that tribe was responsible for this. And the history of all of it, it makes it more impactful. But all of these lists of names, that's like the panel. All of these names come together. They all have roles that they played in advancing the kingdom. It's significant. Each name that I cannot say in the book of First Chronicles or Numbers or anywhere else that we see this throughout Scripture, those people were people that had gotten in the game. They were needed by God to accomplish what he had. Now, I realize what I just said. And just before we start splitting theological hairs, I'll say it so you don't have to. God doesn't need any of us. He is enough all the time, in every way, all by himself. It is our privilege to be on mission with him in what we do. So I know that. We don't have to talk about that. I know that, yes, God doesn't need us. But in that moment, these are the people he chose to use. And here's the log of names, people that he chose to use in this. And they were needed to accomplish the mission. And had this person not said yes from this tribe, then that whole tribe might have been messed up. And then now we don't have this person's name over here. And this, see where I'm going with this? And then there's this panel on the stage and they're all needed. And then there's us. And we're all needed. No matter what the situation is or how it feels or what things may be called for in that moment, every one of us is needed to accomplish what God has in this generation, in this time in the earth. For such a time as this, we are needed. We are needed. And it may not always feel easy, and sometimes you might feel alone in it, but there's a whole globe full of right now people on the earth right now who are also in the game with you. They are also just as needed, and they are seeing the mission go forward where they are from. And there's a whole other list of global names that I can't pronounce that are current. They're not in First Chronicles. We are chronicling right now. It's happening. We are needed. And it may be difficult and it may feel lonely and you may not feel like you know what you're doing, but you're needed. That's when I ask the Lord, help me make this make sense. Help me feel the importance of this passage in First Chronicles. Another one that I can't understand. Another one that just feels like I just want to get through this and get to the good part of the story. This is the good part of the story. These are the people who made an impact, and we're writing that ourselves right now. So whatever it takes to lock in with the word, whatever it takes to see yourself as one of those names on one of those lists that someone will be reading down the line. And because you said yes right here, right now, in this moment, then you open up the door for someone down the line that you may not even know, that you'll just be a name on a page to them. But your yes to God now advances the mission. The mission is continuing, and you are needed.